Welcome to Module 7. This is Lecture 7, Chapter 10. Race and ethnicity are very similar but not the same. An ethnic group simply shares a common culture. Race is a socially constructed category based loosely on physical traits. It is not, however, caused by physical traits. There's no race within biology. In other words, there's no gene for race, there's no separation between people according to racial categories that occurs in nature. They're always made up by people, and they change over time, and they change from place to place. Racialization is the process by which racial categories are created. Racial formation simply means that groups decide what is a race, who's in a race, and they formulate that, and then they make it a matter of law. In sociology, a minority group is not defined by its size. It's only defined by its relationship to the dominant group. The dominant group is the one with the power, and the minority group is the group that has been dominated by the dominant group. After a group is formed into a race, normally there are stereotypes that arise. These are ideas about what members of a group are like, and they're always oversimplified. You can always find somebody within any group that meets a stereotype about that group, but that person's behavior really doesn't represent the group. Every group has people who behave that way, but because of the stereotype, when a person within a group that has been stereotyped acts a certain way that fits the stereotype, then everyone says, see, the stereotype is true because look at this person behaving the way they're behaving. But actually stereotypes are always incorrect when it comes to taking individual action and applying it to a group. The concept of stereotype interchangeability comes about because sociologists discovered that whatever stereotype accompanies a minority's position at the lower level of the hierarchy, that stereotype will remain with that position. So if a group moves up the social ladder and is no longer in an oppressed position, and another group moves into that status position at the bottom of the social hierarchy, the same stereotypes will be applied to the new group. So for instance, whoever's on the bottom of the pile is likely to be said to have too many children, to be irresponsible, to do too much drinking, to be lazy and not want to work, etc. It doesn't matter who's at that lower level of position, the stereotypes remain pretty much the same. Prejudice means prejudgment without knowledge. It's different than discrimination because discrimination requires action. Prejudice is simply a way of thinking. Discrimination, in the way that we normally see it in society, is an action of unequal treatment. Now, here it says that it's negative, and we usually are looking at negative forms of discrimination. But any kind of differential treatment is a form of discrimination, and occasionally we actually give different treatment based on something positive. For instance, we don't make children work in factories, so we are treating them differently than we treat adults, but it's not in that case a negative. But we're very concerned in sociology with negative forms of discrimination, and that's why your book focuses on the negative. So racism is the combination of prejudice and discrimination. It's ideas about a race and actions toward a race that treat the race as though it is inferior to another race. Anything that is said to be institutionalized in sociology means that the institutions of society have this in them. So institutionalized racism means that the way things are normally done in institutions have an effect on different races in different ways. So if teaching methods favor one race over another, then that's institutionalized racism. Or if hiring practices favor one race over another, that's institutionalized racism. Institutionalized racism is not always intentional. Sometimes it is simply going along with the way things have always been done, and that way that things have been done has not been examined. So sometimes it's not clear that there's going to be a discriminatory outcome. So one thing that sociologists do is study policy and keep an eye on whether or not the policies in any given institution might favor one race over another. It's important to recognize that racism can take different forms at different times. Here are some examples on the following slide. Sociologists in the different theoretical groups have very different ideas about what causes racism and what to do about it. According to functionalists, the best thing to do is to have a minority assimilate or become as similar as possible to the dominant group. Not everyone thinks this is a good idea, of course, but it is a functionalist perspective. Symbolic interactionists look, of course, at the micro level, which means they look at how people actually interact and what effect interaction might have on the future of race and racism. Conflict theorists explain racism in terms of class conflict. As they see it, it is beneficial to people who have power to divide and conquer the rest of the population. And one way to divide us is to divide us by race and to treat us differently by race, causing us to fight with each other instead of challenging the dominance of the wealthier class. The intersection perspective is one that has formed to show that in order to really understand what is happening to groups of people within society, today we need to look at racism and classism and gender oppression and other intersections as well, other status positions that come together in a person's life or a group's life in order to determine the outcome for that group, especially in terms of life chances. These are questions we ask ourselves in sociology as we do our work. Policy is an area where you find so much controversy in our country when it comes to race. Colorblind policies seek to treat all groups alike, and that sounds great. The problem is that groups have not been treated alike all along, and they have some inequalities that need to be addressed. For those who think that being colorblind and not seeing race is a good way to go, that works, except that if you can't see race, you can't see racism, and you can't identify ways in which a race is being unfairly treated if you don't recognize race. Race-specific policies require that we look at the specific situation that people are in, and we have to address any problems that are already there in terms of existing racism. Once you complete this summary, you'll be ready to take on the learning objectives for Module 7.